Welcome back to my channel. I'm Angela. If you are new here, I like to show people how I preserve food to stock my pantry and then how I feed my family from that pantry. I of course will fill in the gaps with some store-bought items, but I'm generally preserving my own food, whether I grow it myself or I receive it from a local farmer. Today, I'm going to finally get around to stocking my pantry with home canned beans. I'm doing a variety of different type of beans because no matter the bean, it's going to preserve for the same amount of time for pints and quarts. So I can choose whatever beans that I want, which is wonderful. The beans I'm going to be using today are black-eyed peas, pinto, kidney, and what's in here? Cannellini. Couldn't think of the name. White kidney beans essentially is what they are. I was going to do chickpeas, garbanzo beans, but I couldn't get the bucket opened last night. So my husband was already in bed, and so I thought, well, that's okay. I'll do them tomorrow. So what I did was last night, I went ahead and soaked my beans in water. The purpose of doing this, of course, is to essentially give a head start on your beans swelling. I will say here off the top that I do not follow the FDA guidelines when it comes to canning my beans. It isn't something I do very often. I am generally somebody who follows the guidelines. If you want to know the FDA approved method of canning your beans, you can of course get some sort of a canning book that is reputable. I will always suggest, before I suggest a canning book, I will suggest the USDA Complete Guide to Home Canning. It is a free resource. I will link it down below. To print it off, of course, you have to pay, whether you're paying yourself through ink and paper or you're going somewhere to pay for it to be printed. That costs money, but the electronic version to download onto your desktop, Kindle, what have you, is free. So with that information provided down below, you can check out how to can your beans according to the USDA method. So before I went to bed last night, I just soaked them in water. I'm going to rinse them, sort through them again one last time, and fill my jars. So I figured I'd bring you along since my shelf in there is pretty empty of the beans that I need. I definitely need kidney beans. I love using the white beans, cannellini, for different types of soups. Pinto beans, I love having pinto beans on my shelf because we just love refried beans, and that's basically what I use them for. And then black-eyed peas are really great for some salad dishes that I make. And so I generally don't have a whole lot of those on the shelf, and when I do can them, they last me a little bit longer than all my other ones. So first thing I did, besides reference my canning book, just to make sure I remember the times that I should be canning pints and quarts for, I washed and prepared my canning jars. I'm doing all pints today with the exception of my kidney beans. I will be using quarts. I only use kidney beans for chili, and when I make chili, I'm using 1 to 2 quarts at a time for that. I have my canners behind me with water. Now, this is not a hot pack method that I am choosing to do. It will be a cold pack, which means the food going into my jars is room temperature. The jar themselves is room temperature. The water in my canner, room temperature, and I'm not turning my canner on until I have everything in there. I will then turn it on, and everything in that canner, the jars, the food, the water, will come up to temperature together. So I have room temperature water. I will have to refill this many times. I have clean washed lids. I use Superb. They're my favorite. I have a debubbler. I have a rag. Now, I am not using salt in my beans. My beans, of course, are not fatty, so I don't have to worry about fat or grease when it comes to wiping the rim of our jar. I'm not adding salt, so there's no little tiny particles that I need to be worried about. I still wipe my jars all the time, no matter what. It's a really great practice and habit to get into, and it will save you the heartache of finding out later that perhaps maybe one of your rims was cracked and therefore will not seal no matter how much you put it through the canning process. So it's one last step to ensuring you notice any possible cracks in that rim. I don't need vinegar, of course, because again, this is not a fatty type of canning project. My jars are clean, sanitized, prepped, ready for me to go. So basically, the first thing I'm gonna do is just start with the nearest bowl. It's recommended you have 5 pounds of beans for 7 quarts, 3 1/4 pounds of beans for 9 pint jars, which averages out to about 1/4 cup of beans per jar. That's from the dry state. These have already been in water, so they've plumped up. So you don't have a risk of these plumping up too much more. So I am going to fill my jars to about 1/4 underneath the inch of headspace over here, because they aren't going to swell a whole lot more, but they are certainly going to absorb more liquid. Because it's a bean, of course, it's going to absorb liquid in order for it to soften and cook properly. I want to ensure that I still have quite a bit of liquid in my jar, so depending on the type of bean it is, I might adjust that space just a little bit. Okay, I gotta go get my funnel. So let's see, with the cannellini beans, let me come up close to you. So this is about as far as I'm going to go with the cannellini beans. I want to ensure I still have liquid left in my jar and that it's not just an absorbed dry mess of beans, if that makes any sense to you. I'll show you a jar that I currently have on my shelf as to what I'm talking about. So these are red beans. Got shook up a little bit, so that's why the bubbles are up there. But you can see it still has quite a bit of liquid still in there. All my beans are settled down below that. These are my pork and beans, which is in a tomato sauce. Doesn't look pretty, I know. But they absorbed so much of that tomato sauce that like there's hardly any movement of liquid in there. It is still safe to eat. Your safety is not compromised necessarily as long as you follow that 1 inch headspace rule. You wouldn't want to put a ton of beans in and no liquid. There is a guideline, of course, that you should follow, but what I'm saying is if you do adhere to that guideline and your beans end up soaking up all of that, it's still safe. It is still safe as long as everything has sealed properly. You followed all of the other rules and guidelines, you'll be fine. So I use the pork and beans, no problem. I just know the next time I go to make this, I'm going to adjust things a little bit so that I have a little bit more sauce ratio to bean. So beans are something that I actually really prefer to can during the winter time, just because there's so much going on in the kitchen when it's harvest time that I would rather not have to focus on something that I can do at any time of the year. So I do generally stock my pantry sometime in the winter. There are some exceptions that I, of course, still have to do sometime throughout the summer, spring, fall, what have you, but I try and do the bulk of it. Today is a blustery, cold winter day. It did nothing but rain yesterday. Woke up to today with just inches and inches of snow. It's disgusting out there. So I'm happy to stay in my kitchen, get some work done in the house, and warm up my house with my canners being on. Okay, I'm going to fill my jars up to the 1-inch line, which is about at that neck of the jar, that first ring that goes around your jar, with fresh water, no salt. That's my personal preference. Alright, so I have 8 jars here. I'm pretty sure my cannellini beans came from a bag and not one of my buckets. And I think it was a 2-pound bag. And I got 8 jars from it. So, before I do that, let's debubble. Really get those beans moved around, make sure it allows for any hidden air pockets to be taken care of. Okay, let's just wipe the rims here. Again, I'm not really worried about anything being on them. It's just one of those best practices type of thing. We'll go ahead and get clean, fresh lids. Of course, always work with clean hands as well. We're looking for fingertip tight bands. Okay, I'm just gonna put these in my canner as I move on with my others. They're just gonna wait until it's time. I'm thinking I'm gonna run 2 batches of the kidney beans, it looks like. Leaving a little bit more space in the kidney bean jars to allow for a lot more liquid absorption. If you don't have your own garden, due to space, time, availability, funds, interest, but you like the thought of home preservation nonetheless, and maybe you decide just to get all of your produce from local markets, that's fine too. But what I love, this is a wide mouth. Let's not use, I don't think that one was supposed to be there. What I do recommend that everybody can do regardless of whether or not you have a garden is you can certainly can your own beans, because all you have to do, just like me, is go to a market or wherever you source your beans from. Most of mine come from Azure Standard. Come home and can them up. It is so much cheaper to do it yourself. It's I would say your beans and meat would be a really great place to start with home preserving. And if that's all you do, I think you're doing really, really well then. I don't know. I may have spoken too soon. We've got 2 more quart jars left. So I don't think I'll have nearly a full batch, so I'll probably do the rest in pint-sized jars then. I am using regular mouth jars now. I think to some degree wide mouth would be a really excellent choice, but honestly I also have really no issue with trying to get beans out of a regular mouth jar either. So I reserve, for now, I do reserve a lot of my jars that are wide mouth for other sorts of things until I start having more of a ratio of more wide mouth than I do regular jars. Even though I really don't have a whole lot of canning coming up of most anything at this point, some of these jars will sit on my shelf for a good 6 months, like my black-eyed peas. So, okay, thinking I'm gonna call good enough, leave good enough, what is that? I'm gonna leave well enough alone, good gravy. Not push the ratio of beans to water. I'm gonna get these filled up. All right, now we're going to move to pinto beans. Now these are just going to be plain pinto beans. I have many times in the past, and I actually might go ahead and do it tomorrow since I have to do a canner's worth of beans because I want to do my chickpeas. I have done like essentially refried ready beans. So what I do with that is I use my water and, well, I don't even use water. I use chicken stock. Chicken stock or pork stock would work very well in that scenario. I flavor it with the flavors that I like to have in my refried beans. And so then when I open up that jar, I just put it straight into my pot. I let it simmer for a little bit, and then I will mash them for refried beans, and so delicious. These I can use in many different ways. I like having the plain beans on hand as well, but if need be, I can just flavor them while they're in my pot and use it the same way. So it's a versatile method to have on hand. And since I'm out of both refried ready beans and plain beans today, just to save me time, I'm very low on energy lately, so I just opted to do everything with just plain water. And maybe tomorrow I will bring you along to show you how I do my refried beans. At this point, rinse and repeat. All right, I only have space in my double stack canner now for sure 1 jar, maybe 2. So my black-eyed peas, I will have to run another separate canner for that. I'm going to see how many jars this gives me, because I may opt then to just run my canner the way it is now, less the 1 jar. We'll see how many I get. This way, my next canning session, I will have a full jar, a full canner's worth. I don't want to run my canner with just 3 jars in it. Try and always run a full canner when possible. There is a minimum requirement when you're canning for your canner to work, you know, the way it should. So read your manual for that information. Every canner is going to be different. I believe mine's 3. I don't know. I don't really have that problem very often. It's usually always a full canner's worth, so. Yeah. One, two, three, 4, 5 jars. That was a 1 pound bag, so that's how many jars I got from that. So I'm gonna get these filled up. I'm gonna run my canner as is. These will wait for the next canner session. Okay, so my canners are both full. I did my safety checks on them, of course, before I started my canning session. I've got them twisted on. I've got both of the burners turned on, and I'm going to wait for the steam to start escaping at a very fast, fierce rate, not just puffs of smoke, but just a steady stream of steam. And once that happens, I will set a timer for 10 minutes per my canner, of course. And then once the 10 minutes is up is when I will put my weighted gauge onto the canner. I will then wait for that weight to start to jiggle. Once that starts is when I begin the processing time for each of my canners. My canner that has the quarts in it will process for 90 minutes. My canner here with the double stack of pint jars will process for 75 minutes. You don't ever want to combine quarts and pints if your items process at a different time for both, of course. So keep them separate. You don't want your pint jars processing for 90 minutes. There's a lot smaller of a space in there. They're going to overcook, if you will, and it just won't be a good outcome. So keep them separated if you do both during a processing time. So once I get these out of the canner, we'll come back and I'll see what my results are. So I took these out of the canner quite a while ago. Had to do the whole dinner thing. So they've been sitting here for a little while now, and I've only got one jar that hasn't sealed, and I don't think it's going to. So that will go in the fridge. I did have to tighten the ring down on it, so that's probably the one that had some siphoning in my canner. That's gonna happen from time to time if I didn't crank down tight enough. Everything's probably going to come out of it, so it's fine. It'll go in the fridge and I'll use it up sometime this week. I'll tweak my menu plan to get that used up, but otherwise, I mean, the kidney beans look really good. My jars are cloudy, so I will give them a good wash tomorrow, and that will fix that. I've discussed previously how I don't put vinegar in my canner. These are the pinto beans. Looks pretty liquidy, so that looks good. And then my cannellini beans look really good. Kidney, pinto, cannellini. I didn't have time to do the black-eyed peas. I will do those tomorrow with the chickpeas. But it's that easy. Beans really are super simple, and they're inexpensive enough that if you mess up, you're not out a whole lot. You're not using really precious produce that you've grown or expensive produce that you had to go buy. Meat is very expensive. I used to say let meat, in particularly chicken, be the first thing that you can. But I don't really suggest that anymore, just because that's a really expensive product if you do accidentally make some errors or mistakes. So beans are a really great thing to start with if you're new to pressure canning. So it's that easy. These will cool down. Tomorrow morning I will come, wash everything, take the rings off, wash the rings, and get them up on my pantry shelf. I will, of course, label what they are, and it's that easy. So I'll see you next time I'm here in the kitchen. I don't have a whole lot of more food preservations that I can think of besides some freeze drying. So whatever I'm doing here in the kitchen, though, I will bring you along. I appreciate if you subscribe, if you like this video, and you share my channel with others. I just appreciate the support, and I'm excited to keep going along this journey with all of you. So I'll see you the next time I'm in my kitchen.